Well, Mr. Rader, thank you for accepting my invitation. It's a real pleasure to connect with you, and it seems like you have a strong connection to my home country. Before we started recording, you and I exchanged a few words in Italian. So, what does Italy represent in your life?
It's where I was raised. I love Italy. My parents are American from New York City, but we moved in the 1960s to Italy, and I spent 15 years in Rome. So io sono romano. Well,
So it's a big chunk of your life, like of
yeah.
your makeup.
Plus, plus, I ended up marrying, a woman who is, both her parents are Italian from the Forlì area, which is not far from where you live. So we're
Yeah.
very connected to Italy. Love
Do-
Italy.
Like, do you guys ever visit often here or?
Not often, because, kids and family and busy schedules and stuff, but we do come back and we travel everywhere. We were married in Italy, because my family actually, my maternal grandparents come from Abruzzo, and
Oh,
so
wow.
does Paola's paternal grandparents come from Abruzzo. The villages are 10 kilometers apart. We got married in a tiny church between those two villages. So, and then we did our honeymoon in Sicily.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I can relate to that because I live in a country village of 800 people. So I can definitely relate to tiny little villages. So I was gonna ask you, where did you grow up and what was your childhood like? What are some of the fondest memories you have of growing up?
Um, it was La Dolce Vita, the 60s in Rome. I mean, it was just a sweet, sweet time. We moved in the 1970s where it started getting a little tense in Italy. There's
Yeah.
Brigate Rosse, there's riots, there's people being kidnapped, all sorts of crazy things were happening. So we moved to London, but that was my formative years were there. And my father was an international architect with a practice based in Rome, but he worked all over the world. And he was also sort of a frustrated would-be writer and sort of he was a kind of wanted to be a filmmaker. And so I fulfilled my father's fantasies,
Yeah.
becoming a writer, film producer. And he was very proud of me. I mean, Waterworld was my first script. I was only 26 when I wrote it, so it was wild, kind of crazy, initiation into Hollywood craziness.
Definitely. So growing up in Rome in the 60s, like what kind of movies were influencing you? What kind of movies were you watching? Like Fellini movies, De Sica, and all
Yes.
those guys?
Yeah, all of that. I mean, I think my personal favorite was Bertolucci. I
Absolutely.
just remember just being so amazed by some of those movies. I saw the premiere of Novecento of
Wow.
1900, which was a two-part movie. When he
Yeah.
first released it, part one was like 3 hours and part two was 3 hours, and they released them one day apart, and then they were pulled by the censors because that movie was actually X-rated in its initial release. Did you know this?
No, I had
You
no
might not even
idea.
know this, but
I had no idea.
um, Robert De Niro and Gérard Depardieu are
Yeah.
fully exposed in that movie in the director's cut. And
Okay.
there's a scene where there's that woman who is basically masturbating them, and it's shot full on. You see everything, okay? So Bertolucci convinced these A-list, actors to go full nudity, and that was part of his art. There was that whole erotic side to him. I
Yep.
was just blown away. So yeah, so I grew up in Italy watching subtitled American, not subtitled, dubbed American movies, which was a very strange thing. Like I was convinced, like Paul Newman's voice sounded like this or whatever. Like when I actually saw them in English, sometimes in America, it was like it was jarring. I got very used to seeing the dubbed dialogue, and then every now and then, with certain films, they would release it in English because it was so special. And I remember specifically the first film that I saw that way was Il Padrino, The Godfather, which
Godfather.
remains my favorite film of all time. I remember seeing it in a theater and they kept it in English because it was a masterpiece, you know. They didn't dub that film. That would be sacrilegious to dub Marlon Brando in that film or Al Pacino or any of them. And I remember just being blown away by that experience. What a work of art that was. And another film that I saw very early, I was also a teenager, was Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
I
But
love it.
that was dubbed. That was dubbed. So
Okay.
Paul Newman had this voice, and
Robert
Robert
Redford.
Redford had this other voice, kind of a funny little voice. Um, and then there was an English language movie theater in Rome called Pasquino, which was in Trastevere, right near Piazza Santa Maria in Trastevere. And we would go there all the time to see English language movies. And then I do remember one time we were crossing through that piazza and it was a movie set. There was like a crane and lights and everything. And we were looking around and it was Fellini. I
No way.
think he was making Roma. I think it was,
Oh,
yeah.
makes sense.
So
Yeah.
we were seeing a little bit of that filming, and I was like, wow, this is
Wow.
impressive. And then in when I was in high school, I started sort of in this artsy period where I really fell in love with Bertolucci, all of the movies, but particularly Novecento when I saw 1900, which was originally like a 7 hour movie, and it was in two parts. So there was part one and part two, and they released it one day was part one, and the next day was part two. And I was part of that original release of 1900. And then literally the next day it was pulled off the shelves because it was censored. Bertolucci had gone to extremes in terms of showing sex fully, like full frontal nudity with Robert De Niro and Gérard Depardieu were literally had erect penises in this one shot. And I was like, what is this? It was crazy. And he was just pushing the envelope, like he does. But the majesty of that film, the scope, it was such an epic. It really blew me away. And then I saw all of his films and so many of the Italians. It was later that I, was exposed to more of the Hollywood fare, kind of when I moved to America.
And given the big and huge Western influences on Waterworld, which was the very first script that you wrote, what are some of the what of your favorite Westerns? Again, like you must have some Westerns that you were thinking of subliminally, maybe while
No, even
in the
it was
movie.
overtly thinking about Westerns. It's good that you picked that up because, you know, there have been some anniversary screenings this year. I'm actually going to one on July 5th. They're doing a, 30th anniversary screening of Waterworld, and I did one earlier in the year. And I asked the audience a question. I say, what genre is Waterworld? And everyone is like, sci-fi, post-apocalyptic, and I'm like, it's a Western.
Yeah,
It's a
it's
Western.
it's like
And
Clint Eastwood coming into town. No one knows where he comes from. No one knows where he's going. He's just
he's the
doesn't say much. He's
Yeah,
just
he's the
a
stranger.
stranger.
He's the loner, the
Oh,
stranger. He's the archetype.
yeah.
And the movie, it's literally a template for this film is Shane.
Oh
Do you
yeah,
remember
Shane. Yeah,
Shane? Yeah.
yeah,
So Shane is a bunch of homesteaders are trying to live a peaceful life. There's bad guys who are
yeah.
messing with them. And here comes Shane. He comes into town and there's a relationship with a little kid. In that case, it's a boy. So I flipped it. I made it a girl,
A
but
girl.
that's the movie. It's
Yeah,
Shane.
it is
And
Shane.
then in the formula, the cowboy goes away at the
Yeah,
end. He can't
exactly,
stay. So,
exactly. Which
yeah.
is also, I think, High Plains Drifter was kind of a remake of Shane, if you think about it, I guess. It just comes, Eastwood comes into town, nobody knows who he is, just cleans up the town and goes away. It's just that template again, yeah.
Mhm.
So I was wondering, how did a Harvard graduate go from, being a Harvard graduate to writing a spec script and selling it and having it produced? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I did attend Harvard, and there was a bunch of us who were basically intent on going out to Hollywood. Harvard had sort of a film program. It was a very sort of narcissistic, navel-gazing kind of
Mm,
documentary, personal narrative kind of thing,
okay.
make a movie about your own journey, grow a beard and pan across the mirror so you can show yourself on the camera. And
Okay.
that type of thing. It was very sort of indulgent. We made fun of the professors and stuff, and a bunch of us were like, "We're going to Hollywood." And one of my buddies was Jonathan Mostow, who ended up
Oh, wow.
Terminator 4 and a bunch of pretty big movies. And he and I he literally made a horror movie at Harvard. He was almost thrown out. I mean, it was just like, there was no like intellectual value to his project. I made a movie that was, had a little bit of, they accepted it. I actually graduated with honors. But we were, really keen on. I actually took a year off from Harvard and I worked on a movie set. I
Oh,
just wanted to get real experience. And I worked for an Italian. I worked for Dino De Laurentiis, who later
oh,
I wrote a
wow.
script for.
Which movie
Yeah.
was that?
It was called Fighting Back with Tom Skerritt. It was sort of a pezzo di merda, but it was just a,
Okay.
a vigilante movie.
Vigilante
But
revenge type of deal movie.
yeah. And
Okay.
what happened was, I was in New York and I was looking in the trades and thinking, like, what movie could I possibly get hired on? And I saw De Laurentiis, and my uncle what manufactures film equipment. He's the company that made the Steadicam, that developed the Steadicam.
Oh,
My
wow.
uncle De Giulio, another Italian on my
Another
mother's.
Italian. So Italy is very present in your life.
So I called him and I said, "Hey, have you worked with De Laurentiis?" He goes, "Yeah, yeah. I sold him a couple cameras." He goes, "Do you know anybody on this list?" The production manager, and he said, "Yeah, yeah, I know that guy. Fred, what was his name? Caruso or something." Okay, so I just cold called him and I said, "Hey, I know about cameras. I'm bilingual. I speak Italian." And he just started to talk to me in Italian, and it was just luck. It was luck because I was able to speak to him in Italian. He goes, "You're in luck. I've actually hired an Italian camera crew for this project, and we need a bilingual translator." So it's like he hired me on the spot. So I worked on a set. I was the chiacchista, the clapper
Yeah,
load,
yeah, the clapper guy. Yeah, the
and
clapboard
I
guy.
loaded magazines, and I learned a lot about production just on that experience, and it confirmed my wish to sort of go to Hollywood and make, whatever bigger movies. But in my 20s, we were mostly hustling and trying to get low budget features off the ground. And in fact, I developed a horror movie called Grandmother's House that I ended up directing. And then there was another one, Hired to Kill, that was
Yeah.
kind of very junky B movie. And the Waterworld Genesis actually has B movie origins. So I went to a meeting at the office of Roger Corman, who was the king of the B movies.
Yeah.
And there was this guy there named Brad Kervoy, who was a production executive, who then went on to produce Jim Carrey movies and a bunch of others. But at this point, he was hustling, just like we were all hustling. And he goes, "Hey, Peter, listen, I've got some South African funding. If you write me a Mad Max ripoff, I'll let you direct it." Okay. And I said, wow. I went home and I thought about it and was like, okay, there's two moral dilemmas here. One is, do I take the South African blood money because this was pre-apartheid for a chance to direct? And unfortunately, the answer to that was yes.
Yeah.
Um, but the second question was, am I willing to write another Mad Max ripoff that everyone was doing at
Yeah.
AFM?
Everyone
Everyone,
was like chunking them out and
they
turning.
were junk. And
Yeah.
like, what's that going to do for me? And I was, we had a bunch of us used to rent sailboats and go out on the water. And I was walking in the marina in Los Angeles one day, and I just had this epiphany. It was like, oh my God, that's it. Let's set it on water, and it'll be so unique. So I went back to Brad and I pitched that. I said, "Brad, I've got a brilliant idea. We're going to do it on water." And he goes, "Are you out of your freaking mind? A movie like that's going to cost us $5 million to make." And he turned me down, but I said, "This is a good idea." And I wrote it anyway.
It
I
is.
wrote it. and it came right out of me. And then I put it aside for a while because I ended up directing those two low budget features. But then 3 years later, so that was 86, I wrote it, 1986. And then 3 years later in 89, I dusted it off and I said, hey, I think this is good. I did a quick rewrite and then I called a couple of producers that I knew. And before you knew it, I had an agent, boom, it was sold. I had a two-picture deal, it was sold to Larry Gordon, who then brought it to Universal.
What prompted you to dust the script off? Like you'd put it away, and after 3 years, you pick it out again, take it off the shelf. What prompted you to do that? Like,
So I guess the conviction that it was good. The reason I put it in a shelf was that I got one discouraging set of feedback from someone who was the only professional writer that I knew. It was a guy who's dating my cousin, and I gave
uh,
it to him. I forgot the guy's name. Paul was his first name. Anyway, he read it. He goes, "Yeah," he said like one of those. And I was like, oh my God, I was mortified. It's terrible. So I put it away. But then perspective, that's the beauty. And we have to do this all the time, as creators, is we have to rediscover our objectivity because we get too enmeshed in our work and we can't tell whether it's any good. So that's what distance does. That burners going. So I walk away from this one for
yeah.
a month, 2 months, and then I come back and I'm like, oh yeah, that's not bad, and then I go back to that one. So I had distance. I got distance. I knew there was something good there, but I reread it and I gave it to some other people and they were like, this is really good. And then that sold. It was sold in a matter of, I think it was 6 weeks after I, kind of like found representation.
But did you do any like some rewriting on it before it's
Minor cleanups.
rewrites? Okay.
But the basic story was all there.
Oh, okay. Um, so Larry Gordon, Lawrence Gordon, he bought it. Like he had is that correct? And
Yeah.
he was the one who had produced Field of Dreams, had a relationship with Kevin Costner.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Larry knew everybody, of course. He was pretty
Yeah.
big. But there was a couple of steps before Larry. So the I knew these producers named Andy, Jeff Miller and Andy Licht, and they were recent USC graduates from the Peter Stark program. So they were up and coming producers. They had a housekeeping deal with John Davis. John
Okay.
Davis produced all sorts of movies,
Yeah.
Predator, all sorts of things. And so I gave it to them. They loved it. They brought it to John Davis. Davis loved it. And then he says, I want to partner with Larry Gordon on this. So he brought it to Larry Gordon. And then long before Costner got involved was development. I mean, I was initiated in what we call development hell. Okay, this is a
Hmm.
Hollywood term, which means you're going to get a whole bunch of notes from a whole bunch of people who don't know that much about writing and are really trying to crank out the formulas. So they kept telling me, make it darker, make it grittier, make it cyberpunk, make it this, make it that. And I was like, my original script had sort of magic and mysticism, not literal magic, but it had
Yeah.
more of a
A
kind
flair
of
to it that was magical.
yeah, and we lost all of that. So, but I was young, I didn't know what I was doing, so I was just kept doing. I did, 5 or 6 drafts, and then they started bringing on. I'm Here's the story of how I found out that Kevin Costner was attached. I had another friend who was a up and coming writer, who she was a TV writer, and she had some kind of a deal on the Universal lot. And she was in one of those little golf carts that you
Yeah.
drive on, okay? And she is passing, Kevin Costner is walking and talking with someone right here.
Okay.
And as she passes, she hears one word, Waterworld. She
Out of
heard
the mouth.
Costner is talking about Waterworld, and
Wow.
she knew that I had this script Waterworld that it was out there. She calls me right away and she says, "Is Costner attached to Waterworld?" I'm like, "I don't know." And I call my agent who was at CAA, and I said, Ken Stovitz. I said, "Ken, is Costner attached to Waterworld?" He goes, "How did you find out? How did you know that? It was a secret. It hadn't been announced." So suddenly, okay, now Kevin Costner is attached. Now here's the thing. When you are a 26, 27-year-old writer and Kevin Costner comes in, he's going to want to bring in his guys, his writers, his guys. He brought in David Twohy, and he also brought in Kevin Reynolds. Now, at a certain point, there were other directors that were interested. I had heard at one point that Robert Zemeckis was interested in
Yeah,
directing, which would have been really interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
But Costner wanted Reynolds because he had worked with him, on a bunch of movies. They did that early movie that was Kevin Reynolds', thesis project.
Yeah, Fandango and Robin Hood, and yeah, they had a relationship there.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So, so then
yeah,
I was
sorry.
I was replaced. Suddenly, and that was Tui, and then there was four or five other writers, and then the next time that I interacted with, I had one conversation with Kevin Reynolds, and then the next time I interacted with all of them was when I was visiting the set, in Hawaii, like 2 or 3 weeks into production, and it was like crazy. Um,
Um,
so
I was wondering while writing the script, did you have a specific actor in mind for the Mariner?
I
And
did.
what actor was that? And what did you eventually think when Costner was actually seeking to play that role? Like he wanted to do the movie. What did you think of him wanting to do the movie versus the actor that you had in mind when you were writing the script?
Right. So the actor that I had in mind originally was Harrison Ford.
Okay.
I just felt like that was the guy, right? And when Kevin Costner, was attached, so I had slightly mixed feelings, like it wasn't my guy that I was picturing
Okay.
all this time. On the other hand, he's this major A-list actor who's coming off of a string of successes, like, Prince of Thieves and, Dances with Wolves, and he's like,
Bodyguard and
yeah,
whatever.
you're not going to turn down Kevin Costner. I mean, that's like, amazing. That's a dream come true,
Yeah.
right? And then ultimately, I thought that he did some very interesting things in the performance. What I think he did really well was pr um, kind of play the epigenetics, which is like he's no longer completely human at this point. He's something else. He's like the beginning of an evolution into almost a
Yes.
post-human, and he kind of played that. There was an outsider quality to him, especially in that final scene. I love the way he's freaked out in that forest,
Oh
on the
yes.
island. It's
When he
like,
sees
what
the
is this?
horses and the animals,
Birds,
the birds.
birds, and it's weird. I can't, this is not me. This is not my, I'm a fish. I need to be in the water.
Yeah.
That was a really good moment.
Yeah. Your original script was more sci-fi oriented in terms of the visual representation of the mutations. Like some of the smokers have a lobster arm. The contraption that the mariner uses to turn pee into water was more like a kidney. So,
Organic, yeah.
yeah, more organic. So, what did you wish the final film ended up using more of your original spec in terms of those things, maybe?
Yeah, yeah, that is interesting. I mean, that was definitely disappointing because I thought that there was some more fantastical aspects to the imaginary world, the world
Yeah,
building.
the world
Um,
building was great, I felt.
yeah, I mean, I appreciate that you read that original script. The problem, and this is the problem with Hollywood development hell, is that they just want to make it look like whatever, Terminator or whatever, the one that made a lot of money. So let's
Yeah.
make it rusty and gritty and this and that. And so you're suddenly just doing sort of a laundry list of what they think is going to be successful, as opposed to risking something kind of, whoa, like I've never seen that before, like seeing a pirate guy with a lobster claw. That would have been really cool,
And also it was cool that the mariner had a horse on the
hmm
trimer and on the boat, on his boat. That
I
was
love that. I
it
love
was
that
really
detail because
cool.
yeah, I love that detail because that cinched it as a Western. You know,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but
And how weird. How can you have a horse on a boat? Like,
that's
it
the
just,
beautiful thing about it. That's the cool thing about it, I felt.
yeah,
Yeah, they were trying to make it. like make it to appeal to the widest audience possible by checking off these bullet points that other movies that came out were successful at, as you were saying, make it more palatable to whatever was had been successful before. So, but you lose all the edges, you lose all the
It's
people
it's
that
more
what
like
that
it's
maybe
more
the
like the wonder. It's not even the edges. It's not they wanted edges. They wanted sharp edges and rust and I wanted wonder. I wanted like whoa, like and one of the things, if you've read the original, you saw that they completely repurposed the Exxon Valdez
yes.
into something that was completely the opposite of what I had in mind for it. There was my original use of that was that it's ends up being the sanctuary of natures. That boat, the boat that was one of the biggest oil disasters in American history, ends up being like Eden, the Garden of Eden, because people have been collecting trees and seeds and plants, and
Yeah.
there's horses on
Yes.
the Exxon Valdez. So then you take that theme and it's full circle, So and there's a discovery of that boat, and then there's a fight over that boat, because that represents the world. It's what we did to the world. Now we're going to do this boat, and how many?
It was
When
like
will we,
Noah's Ark.
what's that?
It was like Noah's Ark.
Yes, it was Noah's Ark.
That was it was, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So you wish those elements had made it, had stayed in, basically, stayed into
Yeah,
the final movie.
I do.
What? Sorry. What did you say? Sorry.
No, I do. I do
Oh, you
wish
do.
to see
Okay.
some of those elements.
So did you ever meet Kevin Costner during the production of the film
Sure.
and like on the atoll?
No, I didn't meet him on the atoll. The atoll, of course, had sunk 3 weeks before production. There was
Wow.
a whole disaster, and they had to rebuild it. So that's one of the reasons it became so expensive. But by the way, I do want to disabuse the audience of the idea that Waterworld was a flop. Waterworld is one of the most profitable films in the Universal catalog. They
Yes.
have made billions of dollars on Waterworld. And the reason is that now it is continues to this day in four theme parks. The Waterworld, stunt show is in four theme parks, all over the world, playing 365 days a year, 7, 12 shows a day, 2 or 3 thousand people every time. There's a mythic like thing that has endured about that film that I'm sort of proud of. As you said, it is the flood myth. It's in our bones. We know this story. We need to see this story. This is an important story.
Yeah.
So when I was on set, it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks in, and they were already like 3 weeks behind. So they'd gotten nowhere. And there was tension. There was quite a bit of tension. And there's stuff going on, in Kevin Costner's personal life too that, contributed to that tension. So,
Yeah. So basically, Waterworld ended up turning into a major franchise, as you were mentioning. And the live action stand show, which has been going on for 30 years, and three other more attractions have opened up since then. So all of that debunks the rumor and the myth that Waterworld was this big flop, which it absolutely wasn't. It's made so much money. Um, as far as you're aware, did Universal ever think about making a sequel then, or
um, not then,
not
not then.
then?
More
Yeah, more
recently,
recently, I've heard of
they,
that.
they were thinking about a TV series. They were thinking about a TV series.
Okay.
Um, but I am going to drop a um, little mini announcement right here on your show, which is I'm writing a new Waterworld book.
Wow, really? A book?
Yes, we have actually reacquired the rights to Waterworld, using a statute in the U.S. Copyright Act, which allows the original copyright owner to reclaim the copyright after 35 years of the date of transfer. So that is done, and I'm working on a new book. It's called Waterworld Reborn, and all the things that were missing from that movie are now going to be in this
And
book.
they're gonna be in the book. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for telling me. Wow. Thanks. That's exciting. When do you think it's coming out?
Um, Probably early next year.
Okay, so early 2026. Wow, that's really cool. So do you think that maybe will lead into like a show?
Yeah,
Or
we hope so. So we need Universal's cooperation to do
yeah,
it. We have, U.S. copyright, but they have international. So we would have to team up with Universal to make this happen. But, let's see. Let's keep our fingers crossed. I think there is a public, thirst for this title.
absolutely.
I never, everywhere I go, I get people saying, "Oh my God, I love that movie." Especially, how old are you, Pietro?
I'm turning 37 in a month.
Right. So you were of the age where you were watching a VHS of that
Yeah,
movie
yeah.
as a
And
teenager.
I was actually.
Mhm. And I've heard so many people say this. In fact, at that last screening I went to, I was signing people's VHS copies, but particularly women of your age were saying, "Oh my God, I love that movie." You know why? Because that girl was empowered. She was not just a Disney princess, putting on dresses and doing, and even though sometimes those Disney princesses are fierce and they have character or whatever, but this girl was able to stand up to a cutthroat guy and
Yeah.
soften him, get through to him. And she was cool. They just, were talking about that. And I was like, wow, that is really cool. And guess what? This is actually my wife's idea, because she's also a filmmaker.
So you were telling me about this new Waterworld project you have been working on, which is actually a book, and it's called Waterworld Reborn. And actually, it was kind of your wife that has been like prompting you to do something with Waterworld for many, many years. Um, and this time, the protagonist of this Waterworld Reborn is going to be Enola, right?
And
Who was the little girl, and now she's all grown up. And so we were saying that you and your wife co-wrote uh, a a script,
a
actually,
treatment.
a
We
treatment.
co-wrote a treatment for this new take. And the basic idea is just this idea of balance. You know, the the world is out of balance, and certainly Waterworld is very out of balance. And part of that is this kind of the patriarchal energy is an energy of taking and abusing resources and greed and consumption and all of that, and the matriarchal, the feminine energy, is one more of conservation and of cooperation, collaboration, and nurturance, right? So we just felt like, you know what, we need to rebalance this story, so let's give it to a female lead. And let's talk about these ideas. Let's talk about the fact that nature is feminine and the planet itself is, if you look at Hindu ontology and stuff like that, that's the female expression. It's divine mother. Father is up there and mother is here, and we need to balance the two. So there was this whole possibility of relaunching it in this new way, in the way that it was originally intended. At that point, I wasn't as sophisticated in terms of these ideas, but they were in there subconsciously. And Kevin Reynolds, the one and only phone call that I had with him before the movie was, he says, "I want to make an echo fable. I want to make an echo fable out of this movie." I'm like, "Yes, that's what we should do." And he says, "Yeah, but I'm getting another writer." So, okay. I said, "Okay, good luck with that." But they didn't do an echo fable. They actually missed certain opportunities. Like, you know, the way I use the Exxon Valdez, that was an echo fable. That's Noah's Ark. That's the Garden of Eden. So then what happens when the forces of greed are exposed to the Garden of Eden? What happens? Okay, that now you're talking about an echo fable. Anyway, we're hopefully going to do that in the new book.
And that's all very exciting as a major fan of the movie. But as you were saying, the film itself is beloved around the world. Like, so this myth that it was hated, it was a flop, it's just not true. It's just
Not
facts.
true.
Facts speak to the contrary of that. Like, it's just so my question is, what is, in your estimation, the legacy of Waterworld?
The what?
The legacy,
Oh, the legacy.
the
The
leg.
legacy. So, you know, I don't even know if you know this, but it was a powerful, it became kind of a cult classic, right? And it has endured. And that's one of the reasons that Universal keeps opening these theme park rides because the demand is endless. I'll give you an example of this. In the park in Beijing, there's a Universal theme park in Beijing. Waterworld has a zone. It's not just the attraction. There's a Waterworld zone where there's a cantina and there's a couple of other things.
Wow,
Like this is a one title. It's not a franchise. It's not like
it's
Transformers
not
or Jurassic
Avatar. Yeah,
Harry Potter. It's
yeah,
not it's just one movie and it has a zone because certainly in a country like China, it's fascinating. There's something fascinating about that telling of the flood myth, and the fact that we know that story on this fundamental level. So it has attained this cult classic status, and it also is a very, very relevant conversation, more so now than ever, which is what are we going to do? The sea level rises. Okay, so let's just talk about the conceit of Waterworld. There's no way the water would have to rise 5 miles for
yeah.
that to work. Okay, so it didn't. It's not never going to rise 5 miles. But even if it rises, 50 meters or whatever, this is hundreds of millions of climate refugees, islands submerged. In Bangladesh alone, 30 million homeless. What do we do with them? What do we do with them? I was actually invited to the United Nations in 2019 to discuss the feasibility of floating cities. Could we make floating cities? There was a roundtable, and they had engineers and architects. A very well-known architect from Denmark called Bjarke Engels had put together a whole proposal. He had a model. He had 3D renderings of what prototype, modular floating cities could look like. So maybe that's what we have to do. So maybe it's like Waterworld was, provoking these levels of conversation that, we really need to be having. The one of the former foreign minister of Polynesia was there. He was one of the hosts saying, "My island will be underwater. We need to figure something out here,
Yeah.
what are we going to do?" So it was ahead of its time, and I
Oh,
think
definitely.
its legacy is that people have a fondness for the movie, and also it's a little bit of a clarion. It's a little warning. It's a big bell to say, hey, you know,
Yes, yes, I guess that's right. And also, I perceive, and I think a lot of other people do, that there could be something more could be done with the world building that was established, and it wasn't fully utilized, as you were saying. I think people perceive that because it's just so endless. The possibilities are endless within that
wait
world.
till you see.
So,
Stay tuned. Wait till you
yeah.
see.
So you've developed several projects for like Hollywood giants like Dino De Laurentiis. You've done something with Spielberg and John Davis, of course. And you also wrote two books, one of which is Playing to the Gods, which, from what I gathered, is being turned into a feature.
Yeah.
What is the status of that, and what's your fascination with that story?
So that's the story of it's a rivalry. One of my favorite movies is Amadeus. I
Oh, wonderful.
just brilliant movie, and in that movie. it's about the sort of the envy of the person who's just not the genius, and it's told from, Salieri's point of view. It's such an interesting, that rivalry. Then you just show the evolution of an art, and what does genius mean. And I came across the story of Eleanor Duse, who's in, basically the mother of modern acting, and yet very few people know this. Very few people know about Eleanor Duse, an Italian actress who was self-taught. She did not go to any major institutes or, academies. She was part of a traveling troupe with her family. They were poor, but she also rediscovered the mystical aspect of acting, which is acting is transmission from something within, where your ego goes away and something else comes out. It's like the sacred practice, and it's method acting. It's what modern acting is, and yet it wasn't always the case. The style in the 19th century was the opposite. It was called symbolic acting, and it was acting from the outside in. So Sarah Bernhardt, who everyone knows because she's one of the most famous actresses of all time, a French leading lady, she invented the culture of celebrity, um, because she realized that the performance did not end on the stage. It continued in the salon, at the restaurant. She wanted to be in the morning paper. So
Mhm.
it was a whole performance. It was, and she gave you, Sarah Bernhardt, she made sure that, she looked right at you. Eleanor Duse did the opposite. She invented the fourth wall, that idea that you never make eye contact with your audience, never, until her curtain call. That was the only time she
Wow.
came out at the end and she acknowledged the audience. But before that, she was completely in character. And it was so confusing at the time to the audiences because they were expecting spectacle.
Yeah.
Um, and it was revolutionary. And what was amazing is these two had this incredible rivalry. They, at first, Eleanor, who's younger, looked up to Sarah. She was an emancipated woman who was running her own theater company. Like, oh my God, that's who I want to be. And then she saw her act and she was like, wait, what is, and so like fighting for the same plays. At one point, they were sleeping with the same guy, fighting over playwrights. And D'Annunzio, another great Italian, incredible character, the
Yeah.
proto fascist, kind of right-hand man of Mussolini for a while until Mussolini was threatened by this guy and exiled him and said, "You got to stay out of the way because you're actually much cooler than I am."
Yeah. Huge
Um,
personality.
and very talented poet, but also creating from a slightly different place, like that egotistical
Yeah.
poetry. And I just thought, oh my God, this is so rich. It's Shakespearean. It's such an incredible story. So I just dove in. Actually, the story of origin was that it was a script first. That was a script.
Oh, that was a script?
I wrote that, I co-wrote it with my girlfriend at the time, who was an actress who told me about this story. Her name is Michelle Weissman, and she told me she had read that book, Mystic in the Theater, about Duse, which was another really cool book about, how she would, um, you know, she was almost like a priestess on that stage. There was some electricity that was happening, and she would blow people away. Anyway, she told me about the story. We said, let's write a script together. And there was a lot of traction with this script. Okay. It was at CAA. Annette Bening at one point was attached. There was all sorts of people who wanted to be in this movie. And then suddenly one day, all the doors closed. You know why?
No. Why?
The producers of American Beauty, Bruce Cohen and Dan Jinks, were developing the very same story. And guess who was attached to direct it?
And,
Steven Spielberg.
Steven Spielberg. Okay.
He has a movie called The Rivals. He, by coincidence, was developing the very same story. So when we sent it to them, we thought, those producers are going to love this. They said, so sorry, we can't read this. We're developing the same story. And then Spielberg, who was also at CA, meant that's it, over. Our script was dead. Our script was dead, and it was dead for a long time. And then I was like, I've got to write this as a book. It's too good. So I wrote the book. Meanwhile, this story has a very interesting coda. Spielberg decided that he was not going to direct this. Okay, like he does. He sits on projects for a long time. Memoirs of a Geisha being another example. He bought that book, he thought he was going to direct it, and then he passed it on to someone else. So in this case, He passed it on to a very talented Golden Globe and Emmy winning director named Michael Susi, who
Mhm.
had directed Grey Gardens with Jessica Lange and
Oh
Drew Barrymore.
yes, yes, yes. I know
Yes.
that movie.
Very talented, works well with women, visionary, cool, really writer director. He was attached to The Rivals, Spielberg's version
Good
of this
version.
story.
Yeah.
However, he wanted some rewrites, and Robin Swicord, who had written that script, was like, I don't want to write it. I don't want to rewrite it. Let's set it up. We set it up, and you pay me, I'll rewrite it. So Michael was frustrated. My book came out. My agent said, let's send it to that guy. Let's send it to Michael. And he pivoted. He pivoted and he abandoned Rivals and came to our project, Playing to the Gods. And he has written an incredible script. And there's at least one Oscar nominated actress attached to it. And we also have Tarantino's producer, Shannon McIntosh, is producing, and a guy named Brunson Green, who produced The Help. So another like very talented, two very talented producers are attached. And we have one actress, we need the other. So we're in that game.
Okay, so you're in that phase of finding. Okay, nice, very. That's a really cool story. How these things make like circles and then come back, and when you think, oh, it's over, it's never gonna happen, and still. So my very next question, which is also my last question, is, but I guess you already answered, is like, what are your very next projects?
Those the one, yeah. I mean, let's turn Playing to Gods into a movie because that's going to be great. And then also, of course, this Waterworld relaunch, Waterworld Reborn, and I'm working on another script, but
Something
those are the passion ones. Yeah,
okay. Well, these were my questions, Mr. Rader, and I hope that I didn't bore you. That I didn't like take up too much of your time. I know you're a very busy person. It was really a pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to Waterworld Reborn and also Playing to the Gods, which I didn't know much about. But hearing you tell me the story and what it is about really has me excited. I'm gonna snatch up your book, so I'm gonna be reading it for
cool.
sure.
Awesome. It was super fun to talk to you.